Hello everyone, Matt from Model Minute here. Welcome back to the workbench and the first episode of my new Build With Me series. So what am I building today? I'm building the 1/72 scale Hawker Hurricane Mk.1 starter set. Well, this is technically a gift set, but effectively it's the same thing. So why this particular model? Well, a little while ago I put a vote out on my channel and the majority of you wanted to see this particular one. So if you'd like to be able to take part in voting in the future, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss those polls. This video is going to be a little bit different to my normal build videos in the sense it's going to be a little bit long form, it's going to be a little bit off the cuff, and it's going to have a slow pace so that if you wanted to build this kit or a similar kit, then you have the opportunity to do it at the same pace. It's also going to be in a number of parts just to make it a bit easier to follow along. So the first episode today I'm looking at preparing the kit, what we get inside, and then starting on some basic assembly. This series is going to be perfect for beginners because the skills and techniques here are going to be quite accessible to anyone. So without any further ado, let's get into this build. So starting off with the kit itself, we've got the starter set version here. Now if you're brand new to model kit building, you're going to want to take a good look at the information on the box and also be aware that there are painting and transfer or decal placement instructions on the back. Not every model kit manufacturer does this, they sometimes just put it on the instructions on the inside, but be aware of where the information is that you're looking for. This particular kit is a skill level 1. Now this is a skill level that the company, Airfix, have determined this kit to be, so they're saying it's one of the easier kits in the range for being one of the hardest. But take that with a pinch of salt because obviously people find things difficult in different ways. Airfix do, however, have these flying hour tokens on their boxes, which if you cut that out and keep, you might be able to redeem it against more kits if you become a member of the club. So check out their website for more information on that. So without any further ado, let's get this box open and see what we're met with. So the first thing out is the instructions. What you need to do with these is ensure that you've read these all the way through before you begin building. That's to make sure that you completely understand what you're going to be doing. There's a lot of information there. But the main part you want to pay attention to are the exploded diagrams showing you where the different parts go. Make sure you've read these. Each manufacturer does theirs slightly differently. I quite like the Airfix ones because they tend to be quite clear and easy to follow. And here we've got our parts. The numbers and letters in circles are the part number, and then the number just with the arrow there is the paint colour. So Airfix does quite a good job of telling you what parts should be painted which colour. And it's up to you whether you paint them before you build them or if you build them and then paint them. But depending on the parts, so like here for example, painting these parts might be a little bit easier to do before you glue them onto the model rather than doing it afterwards. Over here we've got some transfers that need to be put inside of the cockpit, and to be brutally honest, I have built this kit before and it's not too hard to do, so hopefully it shouldn't take too long. You should be able to build this within a day, really. There we go. So just make sure that you read these instructions, and if you want to write on these instructions and put more information on there just to help you along, then feel free. This is your kit, do what you want with it. I am going to be going off the instructions a little bit, and then I'm going to be doing my own thing as well. Like here for example, it says put your pilot in the cockpit at the end. Well, to be brutally honest, I think it would be easier to put him in the cockpit much earlier before we put the fuselage together. So you know, think ahead. Is it going to be easy to do that now, or is it going to be easy to do that later? Like here for example at step 19, you could build this right at the beginning if you wanted to, because it's a separate assembly. So you know, you will find your own building style as you go through. So another thing we get are called decals or transfers. These are not stickers. A lot of people, I see it in like forums and on Reddit, people say, oh, I've got to put the stickers on, and they're not quite sure what to do with these. They don't peel. You can't peel them off like stickers and stick them on. They're not self-adhesive. So there is a specific way that these work, and that is to soak them in water and then apply them carefully like that. Airfix uses a brand called Cartograph to make their decals, and they are absolutely fantastic. You shouldn't have any issues with these at all when you apply them to the model. Other companies can be not as high quality, and you might have different struggles, but for those brands I suggest you take a look at some of my other build videos. But more on those when we get to them. Also included in this particular kit is a brush. We've got a number 2 Humbrol synthetic brush that will need soaking in water just to free up the bristles, but generally these Humbrol brushes are quite good. Although, being said, you might want to get some more brushes before you begin. It doesn't really matter what brand, just get the best quality that you can afford. I've got some older ones here, some bigger ones for covering off larger areas, some fine ones, anything that you think you might need. For example, what's this one over here? There we go, that's a slightly bigger one. So a fine detail brush is great for small details, and then a larger brush like this is good for your large areas. Included in this starter set are some glue and paints. So we've got 4 paints included. These are acrylic, so you can wash your brushes with water. And then this is poly cement here. This is the glue. It's not a particularly safe glue. It can be quite toxic, so be very careful when you're using this. And the way this works is it actually melts the plastic parts together. I will be using these during the build, but I'm also going to be using some more paints. These are also from starter sets, purely because I just want to build mine to a slightly higher standard. So it doesn't really matter what brand of paint you get. So if you've got Vallejo or Humbrol or Tamiya, just get the ones that are available in your local model shop. But I've got a good selection there. I've got some Cockpit colour, silver, yellow, a skin colour for the pilot. I've got sort of a bronze colour here, which I'm going to use for the engine exhaust later on, blue for the pilot's uniform, and then I've got a satin and a matte varnish as well, just to go over the top to help give a better look to the model when it's finished, along with the 4 basic colours there. I think these are all the ones I'm going to use for this build, but obviously if I use any extras as I go through, I'll let you know what they are. Whilst we were talking about the glue, one thing I forgot to mention is that, again, if you're in your model shop and you're looking at getting some more paints, you might as well pick up some more glue. So you can get the Humbrol Precision Poly. This has got a needle applicator tip, he says, if you can get the lid off. There we go. This is just much easier to apply to the model because it's got that applicator. This is a bit more difficult because it's got a big nozzle, and it's a bit like almost like toothpaste. It's more of a gel rather than a liquid. Revell make their own one like this, and this is quite good. I use this all the time. And if you're feeling particularly into your models, Tamiya Extra Thin, that's a really good cement because it's this liquid. It's a really thin liquid. It's almost like water. Obviously it's not water, it's quite toxic, but it has this applicator brush and it runs into all those little gaps and things. So for the most part, I'm going to be trying to use this for building the model, so that if that's all you've got, you know that it's possible. But if you feel like spending a little bit more extra money, these are very good products worth investing in. So with that preliminary part out the way, let's look at the plastic parts. So quite common with a lot of plastic model kits, we've got a number of sprues. So the sprues are these plastic frames. When these are made, they are done through injection molding. So they'll have a mold and they'll literally melt plastic into it and they'll inject that straight into the mold. And it runs all the way around the outside of the mold in these little channels and then forms the plastic parts. This helps give a good degree of detail and saturation of the plastic throughout the mold. On the back here, you might see that these sort of little holes or divots here. These are not part of the actual detail of the model. These are called ejector pin marks. So how do they get the mold out? How do they get the plastic out of the mold when it's hard? Well, they have to use some pins that stick through the mold and pop it out. So that's what these are. If they are on your parts and you don't like the look of them, you can use some filler and sand them smooth. But to be brutally honest, Airfix normally molds their kits in such a way that you can't actually see them on the plastic parts. As is quite common with a lot of model kits, the plastic parts are numbered and that corresponds to your instructions. So what you need to do is identify the correct one, snip it off, and then use that for your model. In this particular kit we've got 4 sprues. We've got a smaller one here and then some larger ones which contain all of the parts of our model. And the Airfix Hurricane is a very nice model. There's not much flash, which is extra plastic which is seeped out. So here there is a little bit of flash sticking out on this wing. That plastic isn't supposed to be there. That's just seeped between the 2 mold joins, and that will need to be removed later on to give a much cleaner looking model. But generally speaking, Airfix does quite a good job and they don't have much flash. So we've got the 4 grey plastic sprues, and then over here we've got one which is made of clear, and that is for our cockpit canopy, our landing lights, and another light here underneath the body of the aircraft. Have to be a little bit more careful with these because polycement tends to cause them to fog up, so I might use a different glue for that when we come to do clear parts later. But with that all out of the way, that is effectively the introduction to what you get inside your kit and what you can expect, along with a little bit of a description about what each thing is. So what's the very first thing we're going to do? Well, I think the first thing we should do is give these all a wash. Now you might be asking, why do I need to give them a wash? Well, as mentioned previously, when these are molded, you can feel on occasion that they use it's sort of like a grease. It's called a release agent. They spray this inside the mold, just like when you bake cakes at home, you put butter inside of your cake tin to stop the cake from sticking to it. So they do the same thing with the plastic. So when they mold this release agent's still on the model to help it pop out when it's cooled. But that is still on there. They don't wash them before they give them back to us. So it might be a good idea to wash that off. The reason is because if you try and put paint on your plastic now, it won't stick as well. It might run off the top because obviously this release agent is on there, and it might stop it from sticking, because that's the whole point of it. That's the whole point of the release agent. So what I'm going to do is get myself some warm water with some washing up liquid, and I might even drop some vinegar in there just to help remove that release agent. So here we go, we've got some warm water. Not too hot, because if it's too hot it could melt the plastic, so it's just warm with some washing up liquid, or as I think our friends across the pond say, some dish soap. And I will pop in just a few drops of vinegar, just because the acid in the vinegar can help to break down anything that might be on top of the plastic. And all I'm going to do is use an old toothbrush. Obviously don't use a toothbrush that you're using, because that will not go well for your teeth, but use an old toothbrush. This is actually a toothbrush that I got specifically for modelling. It was only like £1 in the shops. And just simply give them a wash. Obviously, if you're using a sink to do this, ensure that you keep your plug in. Do not remove the water until you have checked that all of the plastic parts on your sprue are still there. Washing your parts could knock them off of their plastic sprues, and if that happens and they're small, they will go down your plug hole and you won't have them anymore. So word to the wise, always use a plastic pot, just like I'm doing here, because if you do knock any off, you can check at the bottom of the pot before you put that water down the drain. So all I'm doing here, as you can see, is just giving them a quick clean, helping to remove anything that might still be on there, giving a nice clean surface which hopefully the paint and the glue will stick to. Once I've done that to all of the sprues, including the clear one, I'm going to just leave them on the towel until they're dry. You could, if you wanted, use a hairdryer or a fan to help speed up the process, but again, if you've got that hairdryer on a really hot setting, you run the risk of melting the plastic. And the other problem there as well is that you could cause dust and little fibres, little particles from the air to be actively blown onto the surface of the model, and you don't really want that because that will not give you the best paint finish later on when we come to build this. So just be careful with that. Cool, so I will see you again when I've finished washing all of these plastic parts and they are completely dry. Cool, so with our parts now washed, and mine are probably about 90% dry because I'm just so impatient and I just love to crack on, we're going to think about getting these parts off the sprue. So there are three main ways of doing that. The first way is to wiggle them backwards and forth until they snap off of the sort of the gates here. But I wouldn't recommend doing that because you could take off bits of plastic from the actual parts that you don't want to do, and then you could leave holes in your model. So although it's possible, it's probably not the best idea. The second method is to use a sharp knife. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate this on these parts here because I need these for step one, which is building the landing gear, or the landing gear bays as it is. So you'd simply snip them off like that. It's not particularly difficult, but obviously make sure you're working safely with a knife. Whilst you're doing this, you need to make sure that you are correctly identifying the parts that you need, because they can be split across the various sprues. So snipping them off like that, you saw that one pinged off a bit. I've got some excess plastic there which I will simply just snip off with my knife. There we go, that's gone. And a bit more here, which again I'll snip that off because that shouldn't be there. Brilliant. So that's the second method. The third method that I actually prefer most of the time, without dropping all his paintbrushes on the floor, is using a set of snips. So normally you can find snips and a knife together in a sort of beginner's tool set in your model shop or online, and my advice again is to get the best ones that you can afford and only use them for the job that you're meant to be using them for. So these snips I'm only using to cut plastic parts off of the sprues, because if I start using them on other things you end up damaging the blades and then they don't give you a nice clean cut anymore. So for this one I also need the lower wing surface, so I'm just going to come up against the edge and gently snip it. It's just quite easy. You are going to have a little bit of a mark left over from where you've cut it, a little bit of excess plastic, but we will fix that imminently. There's a really simple way. There we go. So now that I've done that, I'm going to take a sanding stick. This is a nail file in essence. It's just, I literally bought this in the shops in the sort of health and beauty aisle, and it's just a nail file. You use them to sand down your nails. So going along here I can see the little areas like here where the sprue was attached to it, and all I'm going to do is just simply sand it off, make it nice and smooth. Be careful though that you don't sand off too much material and that you don't remove the nice details that we've got there. So what I'm going to do is go and do that to every single part which I have removed from the sprue and get rid of those unsightly marks. Don't forget that your nail file does have two sides. It's got like a rough side and a finer side, so start with the rough and then flip it over to the finer side as and when you need it. So I will see you shortly when I've got all of these parts ready to go. So these parts are ready to go now. I've got the lower wing, the back of the landing gear bay, a wall of a landing gear bay, and the two sides of the landing gear bay, and this sort of gas cylinder. I think it's for like the hydraulics. So what I'm going to do now is use my poly cement to glue these things together, and I'm also going to use a cocktail stick, again something I found in the shops, to put my glue on, because it's quite hard. Like if I try and get this in the right place, oh there's loads coming out already. So like a paper towel is going to be very beneficial here to catch any excess. If I try and do fine blobs, it's just so much, there's just so much coming out straight away. Tiny amounts, it's just so difficult to do. So I'm going to put some on my cocktail stick, and then my cocktail stick can be my applicator. There we go, there's some on there, some on there, fantastic. So another tool that I don't think I've mentioned yet, and if you've got them then great, if you haven't got them then it's not a massive problem, And that is a pair of tweezers, very handy for getting these tiny little details on. So you're looking for those alignment marks there, and we're going to get those lined up on the part. I think, did it go on like that, or does it go on the... Oh, hang on, we'll check the instructions. So I've put the glue in the wrong place. It actually goes on these mounting pins. You wouldn't believe that I've built one of these before, would you? Let's try it a bit. Blob, blob, there we go, careful. Be careful with your glue. Also be careful that you don't get it on your hands. Gluey finger marks on your model is not something that you really want. If you are a bit prone to that, maybe wearing some disposable gloves would be handy. There we go. There we go, he's in place now. See, that's quite a fiddly job, that one. Cool, so that's the first bit. So what I'm going to do now is put that on my lower wing surface. Run some glue along there. There we go. And then that goes that way around with this notch bit sticking up, and it slots, there's little slots there it should go into. He says much. Why is it so fiddly today? Some of these parts do need a little bit of playing around with just to get them in the right place, and they might need a little bit of pressure to help them stay where they need to glue as the glue sort of holds them there. There we go, that's better. So next bit is to add these parts. So that one there and that one there, they are going to go here and here. So again, a little bit more glue. Cocktail stick might be handy. I've got a bit of excess glue there, there's too much on that bit. So we'll get that off and we'll use that on that side there. And then this one goes there. Let's get you back in frame. That one goes there, like that. And then this one goes on the other side, like that. And then at the back here we have the very last component that I cut off, goes on there. That is the landing gear bays done. Just pressing it down, make sure it sticks. And that is the landing gear bay done. It's quite good, I like the way that Airfix have designed this one. This is the normal viewing side, and you can see we've got some nice detail in the way that they've designed it. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So the next thing to do is to put the other wing half on top. You remember on this one I said there was a bit of extra excess flash. So again, simply all I'm going to do is snip that off or cut it away very carefully. And then I'm going to sand off the excess. Any areas like that, quite easy to fix. So with that done, we are now ready to join the two halves. And it's always a good idea to check the alignment before you actually put any glue on them, because if you have any issues, now would be the time to spot them and try and fix them. But I think we are going to be okay as long as we apply a bit of pressure when we put it on. There we go, that clicks in. There's little locating holes and plugs which helps you get everything lined up correctly. So as long as everything lines up correctly, you should be good to go. So we're going to just run some glue carefully around the edges. One of those earlier products I mentioned with the needle applicator, this is like the perfect time for that. There we go, so that's done. We can put some actually on this bit as well, just to help it all stay together. There we go. Right, that's done. Let's get it lined up. Watch you don't get glue on your fingers, because fingerprints on the model would not be attractive. Clip it together, and then you might need to apply some pressure just to make sure it stays together as it dries. You can use clothes pegs if you've got some, they're quite a handy tool. Just clip them onto the wings and keep them together. So you'll remember earlier I said if you manage to get some of this extra thin cement, you know, this is the sort of step which it's perfect for. I'm going to demonstrate how to use it, so if you wanted to consider getting some, then you know, this is like the perfect point for it. So you just simply drop it on the areas that you want it to go to, and it just runs into the gaps. If you don't have extra thin, don't worry, you don't need it. It just helps give a slightly better join. You can very realistically build this model without extra product if you wanted to. Again, it's your model, so build it any way you want. If you want to paint it pink with purple spots, then feel free. I would actually like to see that. I'd like to see someone do that. So if you've done that, let me know. There we go. So it just gives a nice join between the two parts. And then when it's dry, again, you can give those joins a nice little sand, just to smooth everything off, because we've got a little bit of overhang there. There we go. So I'm just going to run my sanding stick along these seams just to marry them up a little bit more, make them look a bit neater, and sort of hide the fact that they have been glued together, just to give a neater look to the model. With the wings now joined, I'm going to glue the cockpit floor part into its holes on the bottom of the wing. It's quite interesting how Airfix have designed this kit, because some elements of the cockpit are glued directly to this, whereas other parts are glued inside of the fuselage halves, which is sort of a more traditional way of doing it. So that bit in there now, and I think it might be time to start thinking about painting. To start with, I'm going to use this Humbrol 78. It's not included in the set. This is an extra paint which came with a different set. This is a more cockpit green colour. I know that in the instructions it tells you to paint it with the green that's included, but that's more of a camouflage green rather than a cockpit green. So 78 is more of a cockpit green colour, and I don't have very much of this paint left. It's a bit running out, but that's not a problem, because I'm going to use some of this Tamiya acrylic paint thinner. You can use water to thin down your acrylic paints, but I like to use this because it works to sort of dissolve the paint a little bit. So what I'm going to do is take some drops and pop them in there. That's about 4 drops there. And now I need to give it a good mix. So I'm going to take my cocktail stick and make sure I get all of that paint off the lid and in the pot, and then give it a good mix. Hopefully there'll be enough paint in here to do all of the internal cockpit areas. Thinning your paint will help give a better finish. If you leave the paint quite thick, so you haven't added any water or thinner, it may result in the paint leaving like brush marks when it dries, because it's almost like applying a paste rather than a paint as such. It's a bit of a strange thing to realise when you come to modelling. You think to yourself, why are these paints not ready to go straight out of the pot? And that was something that I didn't realise initially. So there you go, that's more of a cockpit green colour. But yeah, sadly it is something that this hobby has, is that some products are not ready to go straight out of the pot. So with that paint ready, I'm going to get the brush that was included, and I'm simply going to paint those areas that need this cockpit green. You might find that you're able to get away with just one layer of this paint, but you might need to go over the top if it hasn't quite given you the finish that you're looking for. Just give it a once over. Try and work it into those little nooks and crannies of the details. But if there's little areas that you know you're going to have to glue more stuff onto in a minute, it might be worth avoiding putting paint on those, so you get a nice good bond for your glue. Because if there's paint in the way of the glue, it won't cement it together so well. So that's done. I'd say that probably doesn't need another coat. I'll be happy with that. Inside the cockpit, if your painting skills aren't amazing, it doesn't really matter, because cockpits can be quite hard to see through those tiny little canopies. With the bottom of the cockpit done, it's now time to do the other parts of the cockpit. So we've got here the fuselage half. The fuselage is the main body of the aircraft, and we've got these other components off of the sprue as indicated by the instructions. So this is like a rear bulkhead, we've got the pilot's chair, and then this is the front control panel. So I haven't painted anything yet, I'm just going to simply start gluing stuff together. So the first thing I'm going to do is glue my chair to the bulkhead. So there are little locating marks on the back of the chair, and they go on these 4 pins here. It is a little bit of a fiddly process to do this. I remember it being fiddly the last time I built one of these kits. That's just going to pop on there like that. The thing with model building is you are going to need some patience. I mean, if you don't have patience when you start off, you're definitely going to learn some patience by the end. There we go, that's on there now. So let's not nudge that again for a while. The bulkhead is going to glue inside the aircraft here. So a bit more glue on there. Oh, you probably didn't see that. A bit more glue on this bit here. And then this is going to glue inside there like that. So there's a little hole, and it should join up with this groove on there like that. Try and make sure it's as straight and level as you can get it, because you're going to have to join that on in a minute to the other fuselage half. It's going to go together. Whilst we're here, we're also going to do the control panel. So run some glue down there. That's been nudged out of the way. And then that goes inside of that bit there. Like that again. Try and get it as neat as you can. Do they join up? That's a question, isn't it? So that should glue onto there. Oh, there's little mounting points for it. Yeah, okay, seen that. Let's get some glue on our cocktail stick, not on that end, there we go. Glue on the cocktail stick, let's get some on here, a little bit on there, a little bit on there, and a little bit on there. There's too much on that bit, a little bit on there we go. And now let's see if we can join these up together. There we go, in their little holes. Fantastic, look at that, isn't that a nice looking cockpit there? Yeah. Quite nice for a 1/72 scale kit, really. A little bit fiddly. Obviously, if this is your first time, you might find it a bit difficult, but it's not too bad. I've not really struggled so far. So with that done, I'm going to leave that to dry, let the glue dry, and then I'll come back and do some more painting. Whilst that side is drying, I'm going to paint the inside of the other half. So get my brush back, and I'm going to use the 78, which is the Cockpit green again from before. So just on the inside here, get this area all coloured in that green paint. Again, avoiding the areas where I don't want the paint to be, because I'm going to put glue in this groove here and on this groove up here. So I might need to go back over that with the green later. But for now, I'm just going to avoid that so I get a nice gluey bond later. When you do your cockpits, it's always a good idea to come a little bit further forward and a little bit further back than you think you need to, because when you put your cockpit assembly together and you close the fuselage up, if you can still see grey either side of that when you look through the windows, that might be a little bit disappointing. So I always go a little bit further, so I've covered myself in case you can still see that area when you look through the windows. And with the glue on this part now dry, I'm going to just paint all of that area in the cockpit green. See these little details on the inside here? If you really wanted to, you could pick them out in a different colour like the black, but I'm not going to bother, purely because, like I've said, it's going to be difficult to see inside the cockpit when everything's assembled. So the main reason why I assembled this before painting was to get that good glue bond between those plastic parts. You can, if you find it difficult to do this, you can just assemble it and then paint it if you really want. It's up to you. Completely your choice. So whilst this cockpit is drying, I'm going to move back over to the floor area that we did earlier. There's a few more details that need to be glued in there, and they consist of the pedals for the rudder, which go in this bit here, and the control column, which goes there. So I'm going to add them now, and then I'm going to paint them. They're going to be painted a little bit differently. So the control column, that goes on like that. There we go. You could paint these before you stick them on again, if that's what you wanted to do. And then the pedals go on like that. I like to think that I have got reasonably good brush control, so I'm hoping that I don't make too much of a pig's ear of this. So using the included number 2 brush again, the Humbrol 78 Cockpit Green makes a reappearance as I do the main stick of the column. It is quite possible to do quite fine work with the included brush. The area that you might struggle is when we come in a future episode to do the main camouflage scheme, because that requires painting larger areas, so it's not quite dry, the glue yet. See it moving around. But yeah, when we come to do the large camouflage schemes, the smaller brush, the number 2, won't be so good for that. So the next paint I'm going to use is the Humbrol 11, and this is another acrylic paint I got in a different starter set. It's a silver colour, and I'm going to use this on the pedals for the rudder. Again, I'm just going to use my number 2 brush, but this time I'm taking it straight out of the pot. I'm not bothering to thin it down, I don't see the point. I'm just going to put it straight on those pedals as carefully as I can. Building models with a camera in the way isn't the easiest, so naturally you'll have an advantage over me because you'll be able to move the model around much more freely. There we go. I think we're there with that. Silver is now on there. So what I'm going to do now is a slightly higher level technique. I'm going to take the paint that's still on my brush and wipe it on my paper towel over here and remove the sort of excess. This is a technique called dry brushing. So get a little bit of paint on there, then rub it off. And you think, what's the point in that? Paint on, rub it off. So now there's hardly any paint on there, and I'm going to brush it very gently over the details. So if we're getting a bit closer, I'm going to get close with the camera there. There we go. So on the left you can see that I've dry brushed, and on the right you see that I haven't. And if I dry brush over the top of these details, you can see they start to come out. Very simple technique, and it helps give a little more depth and realism. Naturally, these would get worn, the paint would get worn off of them as the pilot is sitting there and rubbing his feet against them. So I think that's quite a realistic technique. We might see more of that a bit later. The next paint we're going to use is the 33 Matte Black. I don't know where the number is on that one. This one is included in the set. I'm not going to thin it again, I'm just going to take a small amount of the paint and use that on the top of the control panel. Not the control panel, sorry, the control column. I will use it on the control panel as well in a minute. Just a little bit on there, and then very carefully add it to the top of the control column. You don't want to put too much paint on because this has got like see-through details, and if you put too much on you'll clog them up and they won't be see-through anymore. And that is pretty much it for the lower cockpit floor area. So yeah, like I said, I am going to use this on the control panel, and I'm simply just going to take whatever I've got left here and just run it across there very carefully, just avoiding the other details there that we don't want to paint. There we go. And I will get this, I think it's the gyroscope down the bottom. We'll get that bit there. And that's that. You could, if you're feeling up to it and you haven't already, get those details which are on the wall over there, just a quick blob of paint on each one. It's not a massive deal if you don't, because like I said, you're probably not going to be able to see them. And that is almost it for the cockpit area. So whilst all of that paint is drying, I think it's a good time to do the pilot. I know the instructions tell us that we should put the pilot in like at the end of the build, but I don't think that's a particularly sensible time to put it in. So I'm going to put him into the plane after I've painted him, which is at this stage now. So let's start painting this guy here. For this I'm going to get my 000 brush out. It's got a much finer point on it to help me get some of those smaller details like his face and other areas. But for the larger areas I will go back to my 0. Speaking of the face, that's the first thing I'm going to paint. I like to paint my figures, as most people do, in the sense of like getting yourself dressed. So if you think about the first thing that you're wearing is your skin, so we start off with the skin, and then you go on to perhaps the trousers and the jacket, and then you go to the gloves and the helmet, and so on and so forth. You build up in layers as you go. So I've got this Humbrol 61, which is a flesh coloured acrylic. This again came from another starter set, and I'm just going to take a small amount on the end of my brush, there it is, and add that to his face. Very carefully. If you're not too careful, it doesn't massively matter, because you're going to go over any areas you've already covered with that paint in a minute with a different colour. Painting pilot figures can be quite difficult, so I'm going to make my life a little bit easier. I'm going to stick him to the end of this cotton bud, which I've snipped the other end off of. So I'm going to use a tiny drop of super glue, a little bit of super glue, just to hold him on. Don't worry, because it's not going to be permanent. I can just snap it off when I've finished painting. And to be brutally honest, it doesn't matter if you glue something to hit the bottom of him, because that's where he's going to be glued into the aircraft when we've finished. So you're not going to see it anyway. And there we go. He's now glued onto his little stick, which is going to make it a lot easier for us to move him around and paint him. And speaking of painting him, the next colour I'm going to do is his uniform. And I know in the instructions, Airfix tells you to paint him primarily the brown colour that comes included in the set, but I don't want to do that, seeing as I do have some extra paints available. So I'm going to use this 96, which is an RAF blue uniform colour. This unfortunately is the enamel version, because that's all I've got. I am not a fan of enamel paints, and that's because they just find them harder to work with than acrylic. Acrylic is good because you can use the Tamiya Extra acrylic paint thinner and water to thin them. You can use water to clean your paints, but enamels are much harder to clean up because it's effectively oil based. So I can't use water, I can't use the Tamiya acrylic thinners. I have to use either special enamel thinners or white spirit. White spirit's easy to get hold of, it's like £2 for a litre here in the UK. So I will be using white spirit to clean this up. You can use white spirit to thin this paint as well, but I'm not going to bother. I'm going to use it straight out of the pot. So after I've mixed this thoroughly and you know, messed about with it, because I'm sure that it's probably settled in the pot. They tend to settle in layers, so I've got to really work it to make sure it's fit to go. I will be back and I'll be painting the rest of the figure. The only thing is, this enamel takes much longer to dry than acrylic, so you have to give it enough drying time. Although I'm going to be working on top of it imminently, as soon as it's touch dry, it won't be like dry all the way through for a good, well, it can take up to 24 hours for enamel to dry. Acrylic can take considerably less, but enamel can take considerably longer. Well, not everything. I don't need to paint everything. I'm going to paint sort of from his boots down in the brown in a minute. Again, if you find when you paint these things that you need to use a couple of coats to get the finish that you're looking for, then feel free. I have known it on occasion that I've had to use like 4 or 5 layers just to get an even coverage of paint. To be honest though, enamels tend to be quite good that you only really need to do 1. Although the enamel is still drying, I can move on and paint the boots because I haven't got any enamel paint on there. So I'm going to use the 33 matte black from before because I think that's quite an appropriate colour for the boots. And again, I'm not going to bother thinning this paint down, I'm just going to take a little bit out of the pot directly and then just very carefully pop it onto his boots. Obviously, if you've only got the paints in the kit, then feel free to follow the Airfix instructions. I just thought it might make it look a little bit nicer if you wanted to use some different colours to give you an idea of what to do. Up next is this Humbrol 24, and it's just a matte yellow colour. This is not included in the set, but I am going to use it because he is wearing a life vest. So I'm just going to take a little bit off of here. I'm just going to get it out of the pot straight away again. I'm not going to bother messing around with thinning it. And then I'm going to very carefully paint it onto where his life vest is. There is a strap that goes over the top, so I will just paint over that for now. It goes around the back here, and then back round to the other side. Now I'm going to use the 29 brown, which comes as part of the set. This seems thinner than normal. I'm going to use this on pretty much everything else now. I'm going to use it on his helmet, up here. This must be one of the new Humbrol paints because they're not normally this thin, but it's going on alright. So I was using it on his helmet. There we go, more or less like that. He has got goggles on, so we will look at sorting them out after this. He's also got gloves on. So where is his hands? His hands are here, so let's just get a bit of paint on his gloves. There and there, like that. There we go. And I am going to use it on his straps as well, because he's got straps that go to a buckle here. So this is the buckle. He's got these straps that come across the top here. They also go over his waist like that. I don't know if it's a 5-point harness or a 4-point harness, but it's a representation of what he was wearing in his chair to keep him safe. So that goes over the top like that. And over there. There we go. So, what's next? Well, the next thing I think is to just use this silver on the buckle, like that, and to very carefully, just more on the buckle, there, to very carefully pick out his goggles on the top. There we go. And that is, in essence, our pilot complete. I'm going to do one more thing though when all of that paint is completely dry. In this pot I've got a little bit of water, and what I'm going to do is take my, oh there's the number, the 33 matte black from earlier, and get a little bit on my brush, and then I'm just going to mix it into the water. There we go. What I'm doing here is creating a wash, a very, very thin layer of paint. I don't want it to be so thin that you can't see the paint, but that's probably what I've got up the top here, where my brush is. That's probably thin enough. We'll see as we go. So what I'm going to do now, let's zoom in. There we go, spread that paint around. I've got on his face as well. There we go. And I think you can see that this is starting to run into those little recesses and gaps all over him, and giving a impression of shadow, helping to bring out some of those details. Whilst the pilot figure is drying, we need to get this decal onto our control panel. So the very first thing I'm going to do is cut that out. Simply just going to use my scissors to do this, taking care to avoid the other decals on the sheet. There we go. So now we've got that one. And what we need to do, he says not being able to pick it up, what we need to do in order to get this from there onto our control panel there is to soak this in some water. So I've cleaned my pot out and put some warm water in there, and I'll just soak it in the water, and this is going to release the transfer from the backing paper. So that's probably long enough. I'm just going to take it out, let it sit for a little moment. And this product I've got here is called Decalfix, and there are loads of different decal solutions out there on the market, but this is probably the one that's going to be most accessible to you in your model shop. This seems to be stocked by a lot of different places. If you don't have this, then it's absolutely fine just to not use anything, just use water instead. But what this is going to do is sort of act a bit like a solvent. It's going to help melt that transfer onto the surface of your plastic model and help it stick. So I'm going to use a little bit of this, and the way that we do that is we simply put some in our brush, just like paint, but it's quite watery, and then brush it onto the area where the transfer is going to go. I find that Decalfix, compared to other solutions that I've used in the past, is a little bit aggressive, and it does leave a slightly glossy residue. But now that we've done that, we're going to get our transfer, which is suitably soaked, and you can see that it's now sliding around on our backing paper. Now be careful with these, because you don't want them to like tear or fold over on themselves, because it'll be quite difficult. You can use tweezers to put them on your model if you want, but I'm just going to use my brush, and then you can use your tweezers to move them around, or a cocktail stick or something like that. There we go. And then we get it in the right place, just give it a move it around. Just going to reposition it with my knife. Be careful I don't cut it. Very carefully, so it sits completely on the control panel. There we go, all the way across. That's it. So the Decalfix we've applied behind there is going to act sort of as a glue, but also sort of melt it a little bit onto the surface details. So this wrinkling that I've got here, that will disappear. And I'm going to help it along a little bit by putting a little bit more on the top. Like I've said though, if you haven't got Decalfix or a decal solution, don't worry about it for now. You can just stick them on with water, leave them completely to dry, and they should stick down onto the surface of the model. It might not be as good, but it will work. And I know that it works because this is my first ever model kit, which I built about 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, a long time ago. And you can see that these decals, they're still here. They were applied just with water, nothing else, and they've gone onto the model and they're still there. So it is possible. You don't need decal setting solutions if you don't have them. And with that done, the very last thing we're going to do in this video is remove a bit of paint off of the chair, because that's where we want our pilot to go. And as previously discussed, not having paint there will help in helping the glue settle on it and give a good strong bond. Add a bit of cement to it. Going to snap our pilot off. There he goes. And then get him in our chair. Hook his legs through there, that's it. And there we go. So this is it for this episode. And what have we covered? We covered off the basics of the kit, some of the tools you're going to need, and we've assembled the interior cockpit area, the lower wings, and we painted that side as well. So in the next one we should be doing some general assembly. So if you'd like to see the next one, don't forget to subscribe, and if you enjoyed this, make sure you click that like button. Let me know down in the comments, has this been helpful to you, and are you currently working on this kit as well? Massive shout out to my patrons over on Patreon and my channel members on YouTube, whose generous support allows me to continue making videos for you all to watch. For more information on how you could get involved, check out the links in the description, where you'll also find links to my social media accounts. All that's left to say is a massive thank you to you for watching, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time. It's now that I realise why they said put the pilot in at the end, because this is in the way of the pilot. So that's an error on my part.